I had spent months meticulously planning the perfect anniversary party, a lavish celebration to mark 10 years of marriage that was meant to be a testament to the love and success I believed we had built together. As the evening approached, every detail had been attended to with painstaking precision. The elegant ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers. The air was filled with the soft murmur of carefully curated conversations, and over 200 guests from our most influential social circles gathered to honor our milestone. I, Daniel Carter, a respected financial consultant with a reputation for both success and unwavering resolve, had orchestrated this event with the hope that it would not only celebrate our past but also cement our future. Every element, from the hand-selected menu to the personalized decor, had been arranged to exude perfection, a celebration of what I once believed was a strong, unbreakable bond with my wife, Samantha. The night began like any other grand affair. The guests mingled with effortless grace, laughter mingled with the clink of champagne glasses, and all seemed to reflect the image of a couple whose partnership was the envy of many. I was filled with a quiet pride as I took my place at the head table, anticipating the moment when Samantha would join me with a loving smile, ready to toast to our decade of marriage. But as I pulled out a chair for her, a subtle but deliberate gesture shattered the facade of normalcy. Without a word, Samantha pushed me aside and, with an icy composure that sent a chill through my heart, motioned for my older brother, Matthew, to sit in my place. The words she spoke next, delivered in a cool, almost theatrical tone, cut through the festive atmosphere like a razor. "This seat belongs to him," she announced casually, her hand resting on her stomach as if to emphasize a revelation I had not expected, "because he's the father of my unborn child." In that split second, a collective gasp rippled through the room, the joyful chatter replaced by stunned silence and whispers that spread like wildfire among our guests. I remember the look on my face as shock battled with disbelief, and yet even as the news crashed down around me, I felt a strange, detached calm settle in. Instead of reacting with the anger or devastation one might expect, I simply smiled, a slow, enigmatic smile that belied the storm raging within me, and took a seat among the guests, my mind already churning with thoughts of retribution. I murmured softly, almost to myself, "This is interesting. Let me enjoy the show," as I looked around, taking in the myriad expressions on the faces of friends and family. Some wore expressions of feigned sympathy, while others seemed to delight in the spectacle unfolding before their eyes. I could sense that behind every shocked glance and whispered comment lay an interactive choice, a moment when I had to decide whether to confront Samantha immediately or to bide my time and gather the evidence I would need for a carefully calculated counterstrike. In that pivotal moment, the choice was clear. I would not let my emotions be exploited in a public display of weakness. Instead, I resolved to mask my inner turmoil with a veneer of calm, all the while silently preparing my revenge. I recalled every little red flag that I had noticed over the years, the late nights when Samantha would claim she was at work but was really out with someone else, the expensive gifts and jewelry she suddenly flaunted that I had never seen before, the way my brother Matthew had always been mysteriously present at moments when I felt a lingering doubt. Those were the seeds of betrayal that had been sown long before this fateful evening, and now, with every guest watching in astonishment, those seeds were blossoming into a full, bitter harvest. My mind raced with interactive choices. Should I confront her on the spot, letting the hurt and anger flow freely, or should I let the evidence of her betrayal accumulate, saving it for the moment when I could finally reclaim my life and my assets? I chose to hold my tongue. I knew that if I acted in anger, I would only validate her deception, while every measured, cold decision I made from that point forward would be a step toward the ultimate revenge I had already been planning. As the guests continued to murmur and the atmosphere grew thick with anticipation and scandal, I discreetly began opening a secure folder on my phone where I had already stored some preliminary evidence of her indiscretions, screenshots from social media, bank notifications of unusual expenditures, even a few snippets of conversations I had overheard that hinted at secrets shared between Samantha and my brother. Each new piece of evidence confirmed what my gut had always known. I was not the fool here, and I had been watching her closely long before tonight. I sipped my champagne with a cool indifference, every clink of the glass echoing a silent promise that soon the tables would be turned. I knew that by the time the evening was over, Samantha's betrayal would not just be a topic of hushed conversation among our elite guests, but the cornerstone of my meticulously planned revenge. A plan that would see her social, financial, and personal worlds collapse into ruins. In that moment, as I sat among the stunned crowd with a steady gaze and a heart already hardened by years of growing suspicion, I silently vowed that every lie, every secret kept, would be repaid in full. The perfect anniversary party had become the stage for an unforgettable act of deception, and I was determined to turn it into the beginning of my own rebirth. A rebirth defined not by the false promises of a deceitful wife, but by the unyielding power of truth and the quiet, calculated vengeance that I had been building for so long. And as the room slowly recovered from the shock, with guests whispering and speculating in every corner, I leaned back in my chair, my eyes locked on Samantha's as she attempted to regain her composure, and I smiled once more. Little did she know, the lie she had so casually uttered tonight was the spark that would set the course for my ultimate revenge, a course that would soon leave her with nothing but the bitter taste of her own treachery. Chapter 2. The betrayal that blinded me. I sat alone in the quiet of my study that night, the soft glow of the desk lamp illuminating rows of photographs and mementos from years when Samantha and I had built a life together, and I couldn't help but replay in my mind the moments leading up to this fateful evening. I remembered how we had met in law school, how her brilliant smile and passionate drive had captivated me, and how we had vowed to support each other through the challenges of our burgeoning careers. Those early days were filled with hope and promise. Long nights spent discussing our dreams over cups of coffee, sharing plans that seemed so grand and invincible. I had even sacrificed a high-paying job in New York to stay in Denver for her, convinced that our love was strong enough to overcome any obstacle. Yet now, as I stared at the evidence that lay before me in the form of fragmented messages and subtle hints that I had once dismissed as mere quirks, I began to see how blinded I had been by trust and love. I recalled the first signs. Late nights when Samantha would insist she was caught up in endless meetings, her phone always buzzing with calls that she quickly silenced when I entered the room, and a sudden obsession with private weekend getaways that she claimed were for relaxation, even though I noticed an undercurrent of secrecy in her tone. It wasn't just the unexplained expenses or the lavish gifts and jewelry that she now wore with an air of entitlement. Those things had always been part of her allure. But it was the way she spoke about these new ventures with a careless confidence that made me question if there was something more sinister behind her ambitions. I remembered a particular evening when I had returned home from a late shift at work only to find an envelope of receipts and bank notifications that did not add up. In my naive optimism, I had brushed them aside, convinced that love would somehow justify any expense, that her reasons, however vague, were valid because we had promised to share everything. But as I now pieced together the puzzle, every overlooked detail turned into a glaring red flag. A new gym membership she never mentioned, recurring texts that hinted at private escapades, and even a suspicious photo of her laughing with someone in a place I had never heard of. I could almost hear an interactive voice in my head offering me a choice. Acknowledge the signs you once ignored, or remain in blissful denial until the truth can no longer be hidden. That voice was insistent, and slowly I began to document every stray detail, every instance when Samantha's alibi failed to align with the facts, every lingering glance that she cast over her shoulder as if afraid someone was watching. I remembered how, at family gatherings, she would sometimes exchange brief, furtive smiles with my older brother Matthew, smiles that were too knowing to be innocent, and how he would always seem a little too comfortable in her presence. I recalled the time when I had casually mentioned that I'd noticed her spending on expensive outings that I had never been invited to, only to be met with a dismissive laugh and a promise that she was simply indulging in the finer things because she deserved it. I had thought her ambition was admirable, but now, in hindsight, those were the very seeds of betrayal that I had chosen to ignore. I started to mentally replay every conversation, every subtle hint, every piece of evidence that I had conveniently swept under the rug in the name of trust. And as the full weight of the truth began to settle on my shoulders, a chilling realization took hold. Samantha had played me for a fool, and I had been too blinded by love and loyalty to see the truth even when it stared me in the face. I began writing down these memories in a leather-bound journal, recording every detail with a clinical precision that both pained and empowered me. With each entry, I felt the raw hurt of betrayal intertwine with the cold determination to reclaim my identity, to build a narrative that was not defined by the empty promises of a deceitful partner, but by the unyielding strength of a man who had learned his lesson the hard way. I questioned every decision I had made in the name of love, every sacrifice, every compromise, and I realized that my own naivety had been exploited, that I had invested so deeply in a future that Samantha had meticulously fabricated to suit her desires. I began to see that the signs were always there. The unexplained absences, the small details that didn't quite match up, the way her eyes sometimes flickered with guilt before she quickly masked it with charm. I remembered the quiet warnings from my best friend Mark, whose concerned glances at family dinners had warned me of a looming storm, but I had dismissed his concerns as overprotectiveness, believing that love would overcome any difficulty. Now, each of those warnings rang true, and I felt a gnawing sorrow for the years I had lost in a blissful ignorance that had left me vulnerable to betrayal. It was in that moment of painful introspection that I realized that I could no longer allow myself to be defined by the woman I thought I knew. The interactive choice was clear: continue down the path of self-deception or confront the betrayal head-on, using the evidence as the catalyst for reclaiming my life. I resolved that I would document every red flag, every seemingly insignificant detail that now formed the mosaic of her treachery, so that one day, when the time was right, I could use this chronicle of betrayal as the foundation for a calculated, measured counterattack. In that quiet, solitary space, amidst the scent of old paper and the soft glow of my desk lamp, I made a silent vow to myself. I would not let Samantha's deception shatter my future. Instead, I would transform the pain into a weapon, a tool to rebuild everything that had been torn from me, and to ensure that I would never again be so blinded by trust. And so, as I closed my journal and locked away the evidence in a secure folder on my computer, I felt a stirring resolve. The recognition that the betrayal that had once blinded me was now the very reason I would rise again, wiser and stronger than before. Chapter 4. A betrayal that shatters trust. One found myself in the hushed stillness of our living room, the weight of every unsaid word and every hidden secret pressing down upon me as I waited for Samantha to return from one of her mysterious late-night outings. The tension in the room was palpable, a silent, almost tangible manifestation of the betrayal that had been festering beneath the surface for far too long. I had spent countless hours assembling the evidence of her deception, each detail meticulously documented in my private journal and secured in encrypted files on my computer. And now, as I sat in that dim light, the time had come to confront the woman I had once loved with every fiber of my being. My mind buzzed with interactive choices. Should I let my anger erupt like a wildfire and shatter the delicate veneer of our shared past? Or should I maintain a cold, calculated composure, recording every moment for future vindication? I resolved to remain calm, for I knew that impulsive fury would only play into her hands and risk any chance of preserving the evidence I had gathered so painstakingly. When Samantha finally entered the room, I could see that the exhaustion in her eyes was mingled with a flicker of apprehension, an unspoken acknowledgement that something was not right. She moved toward the couch as if she expected nothing more than to settle in and dismiss the day with a tired smile, but I rose from my seat with measured determination. "Samantha," I began, my voice steady and low, "we need to talk." Her eyes briefly darted away, and I sensed a moment of internal hesitation before she sat down, attempting to mask her discomfort with a forced air of indifference. I wasted no time, my mind already racing through every red flag, every whispered lie that had accumulated over the years, and I continued. "I've seen the evidence. The bank statements, the credit card charges, the secret emails, they all point to a reality that you've long concealed." I could see her composure falter as my words sank in, her confident facade beginning to crumble, and in that interactive moment, I silently debated whether to press further or to let her speak. The choice was there: allow her to offer half-hearted excuses, or force her to confront the full weight of her betrayal. I pressed on, my tone rising just enough to demand the truth. You said you needed space, that you were focused on a new beginning. But I now know that your so-called adventures, your private getaways, were all a lie. You have been meeting with someone else, someone who has been siphoning money from our joint accounts, someone who you trusted with the life we built together. Her eyes, which had earlier held a glimmer of defiance, now began to fill with uncertainty, and for a moment, the room was so still that even the ticking of the clock seemed to echo my rising resolve. I could almost sense an interactive prompt within my own thoughts. Record her confession now, or allow her to continue speaking freely? I reached discreetly for the hidden voice recorder I had set up weeks before, ensuring that every syllable of our confrontation would be preserved, a safeguard against any future denial. With that action taken, I allowed the recorder's silent presence to bolster my determination. Samantha's voice trembled as she tried to gather her thoughts. "John, I never meant to hurt you," she began, her tone wavering between feigned remorse and the reality of a life steeped in duplicity. I thought you'd understand that I needed to." Her sentence faltered as I interjected. "Understand what? That you lied about everything? That every promise we made, every dream we shared, was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated illusion to hide your infidelities?" My words, sharp and unyielding, cut through the silence, and I watched as the mask of composure on her face began to slip, revealing the raw vulnerability beneath. I continued, "You played me, Samantha. You played me for a fool. And for what? To escape the confines of our life, to run off with someone who could fund your fantasies while leaving me to pick up the pieces?" Her eyes flickered, and I caught a glimmer of fear, a momentary lapse in her defense that told me she knew the truth of my accusations. The room, once a sanctuary of shared dreams, now became the stage for our unraveling. I could feel the eyes of our family and friends, who had gathered for the celebration, silently judging us from the periphery, their whispers almost audible in the heavy air. Yet, I pressed on, each word a deliberate step toward reclaiming the dignity and control that had been so callously stripped from me. "I trusted you, Samantha. I believed in every word you spoke about our future. I sacrificed so much for you, my time, my money, my heart, and you repaid me with betrayal. How could you think that I wouldn't eventually see the signs? How could you believe that no one would notice the late nights, the secret phone calls, the expensive gifts you bought with money that wasn't ours?" The accusations hung in the air, and I watched as a tear welled up in her eye, betraying the stoic front she had maintained for so long. At that moment, my mind presented an interactive decision. Should I let my emotions surge in a final outburst, or should I continue with the clinical detachment that had become my armor? I chose the latter, for I knew that every moment of raw anger might compromise the evidence I needed for my next steps. "Samantha," I said softly, "I'm not here to yell. I'm here to confront the reality of what you've done. I'm recording this conversation because I need the truth, and because I need every detail to hold you accountable." Her whispered pleas for forgiveness fell on deaf ears as I continued, each sentence a calculated blow to the fragile remnants of the trust we once shared. "Your lies have shattered everything we built. I know about the trips, the secret meetings, the bank transfers that emptied our savings. I know it wasn't just a new beginning you were after. It was a life you wanted to run away to, leaving me with nothing." In that charged silence, as her defenses crumbled and the truth became undeniable, I felt a cold, unyielding clarity settle in. Every word I spoke was a step toward reclaiming my life, every recorded moment a brick in the foundation of the future I was determined to build. I watched her closely as her eyes darted around the room, seeking an escape, as if pleading silently for a chance to rewrite the narrative. But the evidence was irrefutable, and the interactive choice had been made long before this confrontation. I would let the truth stand, unadorned and relentless, as the final verdict on our shared past. As the conversation reached its apex, I softly commanded, "Record every word, so that there is no escape from the consequences of your betrayal." In that moment, the room seemed to hold its breath, every second stretching into an eternity, as I pressed on with the cold precision of a man who had learned that truth, when pursued with unyielding resolve, can never be silenced. And when Samantha finally broke down into quiet sobs, offering nothing more than a disjointed chorus of apologies and regrets, I turned away, my mind already racing ahead to the next phase of my plan. Knowing that this confrontation was but one step in the long journey to reclaiming every piece of my shattered identity and ensuring that the consequences of her deception would echo for all time. Chapter 6. The financial trail of lies. I sat in the quiet confines of my home office, surrounded by the sterile hum of my computer and the rustle of printed documents scattered across my desk, each one a silent testament to the financial betrayal that had unraveled the life I thought I shared with Samantha. Every bank statement, every credit card transaction, every encrypted email that I had painstakingly recovered was now a thread in the tapestry of deception that she had so meticulously woven over the years. I stared at the screen, my eyes tracing the detailed line items that revealed a series of unauthorized transfers, sums of money that had been siphoned away from our joint account on days when Samantha claimed to be on supposed business trips. The numbers jumped out at me in stark clarity. Thousands of dollars, deposited into accounts with obscure names and routed through a labyrinth of intermediaries. It was as if she had set up an intricate maze to hide the truth, one that I was now determined to navigate with the precision of a man whose world had been turned upside down by betrayal. My mind, ever interactive, began to prompt me with a series of choices as if I were facing a digital decision tree. Should I first follow the largest transfer to trace its destination? Or should I compile every small expense that together formed a pattern too deliberate to ignore? I chose both, methodically examining every detail and cross-referencing dates, amounts, and account numbers with the timeline of Samantha's alleged business trips. With each discovery, a cold satisfaction welled up within me, mingling with the bitter sting of loss as I realized that every seemingly minor transaction was part of a larger, calculated scheme to drain our savings and fund her secret escape. I retrieved our digital records and began printing them out, every page a window into the financial chaos that had been orchestrated behind my back. The software of the printer was the soundtrack to my growing determination. Each sheet that emerged confirmed that Samantha had not only lied about her employment and the overseas job, but had also manipulated our shared assets in a way that was both sophisticated and unforgiving. I remembered a particular transfer, a sum so large it nearly emptied our account, that had occurred on an unremarkable Tuesday morning. The funds had been funneled through several offshore accounts, disguised as payments for consulting fees that, upon closer examination, bore no resemblance to any legitimate business expense we had ever incurred. My fingers trembled as I documented this anomaly, taking careful notes and saving every digital copy of the transaction record. I had set up a secure folder on my encrypted drive, and now I added every suspicious file to it, creating an unassailable digital dossier that would serve as the backbone of my legal and personal retribution. As I worked, my mind offered another interactive choice. Should I immediately contact an old colleague known for his expertise in financial fraud, or continue compiling the evidence myself to maintain complete control over the narrative? I decided to reach out to him discreetly, knowing that his experience in deciphering the most labyrinthine financial schemes would only further solidify the case against Samantha. In a hushed phone call later that evening, I laid out the details, the pattern of transfers, the recurring small withdrawals that, when aggregated, amounted to a substantial sum, and the discrepancies in the records that painted a picture of deliberate, systematic deceit. His measured tone on the other end confirmed my worst suspicions. Samantha's financial maneuvers were not random errors or careless oversights, but part of a sophisticated, orchestrated fraud designed to leave me penniless while she vanished into a new life abroad with her lover. Each word he spoke steeled my resolve further. I could almost see the interactive prompt in my mind urging me to press forward with a full-scale investigation, to follow every lead until the entire web of lies was exposed. I returned to my desk with renewed determination and began a deep dive into the digital records, analyzing transaction logs, tracking IP addresses associated with the transfers, and mapping out the movement of funds with the precision of a seasoned detective. The process was painstaking and grueling, yet with each new piece of data, the picture of betrayal grew clearer. I discovered that many of the smaller withdrawals had been made at ATMs in various cities, each location corresponding to days when Samantha claimed to be at work or on business trips. The pattern was undeniable. Every unauthorized withdrawal was a calculated move designed to siphon off our hard-earned savings in a way that would eventually leave me with nothing. As I compiled the data into a detailed spreadsheet, correlating dates, times, and amounts, I felt as though I were piecing together a damning puzzle, a puzzle that revealed the full extent of her treachery. I spent hours poring over these numbers, my mind a flurry of interactive choices. Press 1 to flag this pattern for further investigation, or press 2 to cross-check it with our financial history. Each decision was made with cold, calculated precision, ensuring that no detail was overlooked. Every anomaly became a stepping stone toward building an irrefutable case against Samantha. I then considered another aspect of her deceit, the digital trail she had left behind on her phone and computer. I accessed her email archives using recovery software and uncovered a series of messages between her and an unknown correspondent discussing secret meetings, unaccounted for expenses, and even the phrase escape fund, a term that now held a bitter irony. Each decrypted message added another layer to the narrative of betrayal, confirming that Samantha had not only planned to abandon me with an empty bank account, but had done so with meticulous forethought. The interactive choices in my mind multiplied. Should I send all this evidence to my lawyer now, or hold back some details for leverage in the courtroom? I opted for complete transparency, knowing that every piece of evidence would only fortify my position. I carefully archived every file, every recovered email, every piece of digital correspondence into the secure folder, ensuring that the integrity of the data was maintained with the highest standards of encryption. As I finally leaned back in my chair, exhausted yet empowered, I looked over the sprawling dossier that now chronicled every financial misstep, every fraudulent transaction that Samantha had executed. The betrayal, once an abstract pain, was now rendered in cold, hard numbers, a truth so unassailable that it would not be ignored by the authorities or by the court of public opinion. I knew that this financial trail of lies was not merely evidence of monetary theft, but the very foundation of a comprehensive case that would expose the entirety of her deception. With every line of data meticulously documented, I resolved that the next step would be to present this damning evidence to my legal team and, ultimately, to the federal authorities who could bring her schemes crashing down. In that moment, as I closed the final file and saved the dossier onto an isolated, encrypted server, I felt the surge of a man who had reclaimed control over his destiny. A man who would use the very lies designed to destroy him as the tools of his redemption. And so, with a final glance at the spreadsheet that detailed every unauthorized transaction, I set my resolve in stone. Samantha's web of financial deceit would be unraveled, every dollar stolen would be accounted for, and the truth would be my unwavering shield as I prepared to confront the betrayal that had once shattered my world. Chapter 7. Entering the legal and federal arena after painstakingly assembling every piece of evidence from our financial records and digital trails, I knew that the next step was to bring this elaborate fraud into the harsh light of legal scrutiny, where the cold, unyielding force of the law would finally set matters straight. The revelation of Samantha's systematic siphoning of our joint savings and her clandestine meetings with her secret lover had reached a point where personal vengeance alone was no longer sufficient. I needed the full weight of federal investigation behind me to ensure that her deception would be exposed to the world. Early one morning, still reeling from the shocking clarity of my dossier, I sat at my desk in the quiet of my home office and reached for the phone. With steady resolve, I dialed the number of my trusted attorney, a man who had long been my advisor in matters both legal and personal, and explained everything in measured tones. Every unauthorized transaction, every suspicious withdrawal, and every piece of evidence that confirmed Samantha's betrayal. As I spoke, I could almost see the interactive choices flashing before me in my mind, urging me to either release all the evidence immediately to the public or to let it simmer until the appropriate moment when the full force of federal agencies could be brought to bear on the case. I chose the latter, convinced that a measured, strategic approach would not only secure my assets but also dismantle the very framework of her deceit. My attorney's response was measured and empathetic. With such compelling documentation, he said, We had every right to involve the authorities and launch a federal investigation into what now clearly constituted a sophisticated financial scam. That conversation marked the turning point when personal betrayal merged with corporate justice. Later that morning, I composed a carefully worded email to a senior agent at the Securities and Exchange Commission, attaching detailed spreadsheets, scanned copies of bank statements, and digital logs of every suspicious transaction. Each attachment was a fragment of the larger mosaic, a mosaic that painted an undeniable picture of Samantha's calculated effort to empty our savings and fund her secret escape with her lover. I took special care to ensure that every file was encrypted and that the chain of custody was preserved meticulously, knowing that any slight error could be used to discredit the evidence in court. As I pressed send, I felt a mix of trepidation and quiet satisfaction. I was handing over not only my personal proof of betrayal, but also the blueprint of a financial crime that would shake the very foundations of her world. Throughout the day, I fielded discreet phone calls from my legal team, who informed me that the SEC had acknowledged receipt of the evidence and that a federal investigation was imminent. Every call reinforced my belief that the truth, once set in motion through the legal channels, could not be suppressed or twisted. I felt a deep, resonant clarity as I recalled the many sleepless nights spent poring over documents and tracking down digital traces, a relentless pursuit of truth that now had the backing of the federal machinery. In a moment of quiet reflection later that afternoon, I sat in my study, the soft light of the setting sun filtering through the blinds, and allowed myself to contemplate the gravity of the decision I had just made. I was fully aware that involving the authorities meant that my personal betrayal would become a matter of public record, that my private pain would be dissected in courtrooms and reported on by news outlets. Yet, in that sacrifice of privacy, I also saw the seeds of redemption. The legal process, however slow and unyielding, was my pathway to reclaiming not only my assets but also my dignity. I thought about the interactive choice that lay before me. Should I issue a public statement to clarify my actions, or should I maintain silence and let the legal proceedings speak for themselves? I opted for the latter, convinced that the strength of my evidence and the fairness of the law would ultimately vindicate me without the need for a public spectacle. Over the next several days, as federal agents began to quietly comb through the documents I had provided, I found that every phone call, every discreet update from my attorney, filled me with a sense of unassailable resolve. I began to notice subtle changes in the business world. Investors, once dazzled by Samantha's false promises, now began to question the legitimacy of her leadership, and rumors of a financial scandal started to ripple through our social circles. I made sure to document every update, every conversation, turning my office into a small command center where I monitored the progress of the investigation with the cold, methodical precision that had defined my journey from betrayal to retribution. In one particularly memorable moment, I received a call from my attorney late one evening. A voice measured and grave informing me that an FBI agent had reviewed the dossier and deemed the evidence robust enough to consider charges of financial fraud and misappropriation. That call was the moment when I truly felt that the scales of justice were beginning to tip irrevocably in my favor. I sat back, a quiet smile playing at the corners of my lips as I reflected on how far I had come. From the devastation of that perfect anniversary party to this turning point in which the law itself was about to dismantle the edifice of lies that Samantha had built. My mind, ever interactive, now presented one final prompt. Should I brace myself for a protracted legal battle with all the public scrutiny that might come, or should I prepare a contingency plan for an out-of-court settlement that would leave my personal life untouched? I decided that I would let the investigation proceed, confident that the strength of the evidence would eventually force a resolution that favored my rights and my future. As the evening turned to night, I gathered the final pieces of my plan. Every printed document, every digital file, every recorded conversation, and secured them in a safe, knowing that the journey to justice was now in the hands of the law. In that profound moment, I realized that my decision to step into the legal arena was not merely an act of personal vengeance but a transformation. A turning point where my private heartbreak would merge with a public crusade for truth, ensuring that Samantha's betrayal would be exposed, every lie laid bare, and every stolen dollar accounted for. And as I closed my eyes that night, With the soft hum of the city outside and the quiet assurance of a man who had taken control of his destiny, I felt a deep certainty that the truth was an unstoppable force, one that, once unleashed, would reshape not only my future but the very fabric of the world that had once celebrated deception. Chapter 8. Digital Counteroffensive. Late one night, in the still darkness of my newly fortified study, I sat before the soft glow of multiple computer monitors, each displaying a cascade of digital data that had been meticulously salvaged from the depths of Samantha's treacherous online world. The world of ones and zeros, which she had thought was a sanctuary for her secret lies, was now my battlefield. I had spent weeks setting up digital defenses and forensic tools to track every hidden transaction and encrypted message, and tonight was the night when I would launch my counteroffensive. I recalled the countless hours I had spent recovering deleted emails, bypassing layers of password protection, and piecing together fragments of chat logs that painted a damning picture of her clandestine communications. Each piece of evidence was a building block in the case against her, a case that would expose the full extent of her betrayal not only to the federal authorities, but also to the unsuspecting world that had once celebrated her charm. The hum of my computer fans and the rhythmic tapping of my keyboard provided a steady backdrop as I logged into accounts and sifted through the digital debris left behind by her careless attempts to cover her tracks. My mind buzzed with interactive choices as I navigated this labyrinth of data. Should I immediately disseminate the damning evidence to her entire network, unleashing a viral storm of scandal that might irrevocably tarnish her reputation? Or should I carefully archive every file, preserving the chain of custody to ensure that, in a court of law, the truth would be presented in irrefutable detail? I chose the latter, for I knew that precision and legality were paramount. The digital realm, while swift, could be as treacherous as it was liberating if not handled with the utmost care. I created an encrypted folder on a secure server, one that was isolated from any of her reach, and began uploading every relevant file. Screenshots of incriminating emails, transcripts of suspicious online chats, and even metadata from photos that proved the extravagant beach getaway in Punta Cana was nothing but a facade. As I worked, I couldn't help but recall the moment when Samantha first sent me that seemingly innocuous text about catching 3 fish on a solo camping trip, accompanied by a stock image of a camping tent by a lake. That lie had been the spark that ignited the fire of my investigation. Now, as I dove deeper into the digital realm, I uncovered a trove of evidence that confirmed not only her extravagant double life, but also the sophisticated methods she used to siphon funds from our joint account, transfers made at odd hours, withdrawals at ATMs in foreign cities, and payments to accounts with names that made no sense in the context of our financial history. Each discovery sent a surge of vindication through me, a reminder that every digital breadcrumb was a step closer to exposing her true self. The interactive decision-making in my mind intensified. Should I attempt to hack into the secured accounts to extract even more detailed logs, or focus solely on preserving what I already had? I weighed the risks, knowing that any aggressive digital maneuver might leave a trace back to me, but also that the more I could recover, the stronger my case would be. I resolved to use my own expertise, a skill honed over years as a financial consultant, to extract every last piece of relevant data without leaving a trace. I wrote custom scripts to parse through transaction logs, identifying patterns and correlations that human eyes might have missed, small, recurring transfers that, when summed up, represented a significant portion of our savings. My efforts revealed a meticulously orchestrated pattern. Every unauthorized withdrawal, no matter how small, was linked by a series of code numbers and timestamps that aligned with Samantha's sporadic absences. The revelation was as damning as it was ingenious, a digital fingerprint of deceit that could not be faked. As the night deepened and the city outside slumbered, I continued my counteroffensive with the quiet determination of a man who had nothing left to lose but the remnants of his shattered trust. I even managed to retrieve encrypted messages from her phone backups, messages that spoke in hushed tones of secret meetings, clandestine dates, and plans to fund an escape with her lover. Each recovered file, each piece of evidence meticulously cataloged, reinforced my belief that the digital world, which Samantha had tried to manipulate so cunningly, was now my ally. I felt a grim satisfaction as I watched the evidence stack up, knowing that when the time came, I would have a dossier so comprehensive that even the most sophisticated defenses would crumble under its weight. I recorded every file's metadata, every timestamp, and every source, creating a chain of evidence that was both unassailable and irrefutable in its precision. In that moment, as I sat back and surveyed the digital battlefield I had built, I realized that this counteroffensive was not just about reclaiming lost funds or exposing deceit. It was about restoring my own power and dignity. The betrayal that had once left me reeling had now become the fuel for my resurgence. A resurgence built on the cold, hard logic of data and the unyielding certainty that truth, once uncovered, cannot be hidden. I set aside my phone and took a deep, steady breath, knowing that the next phase of my plan would involve handing over this meticulously curated dossier to my legal team and eventually to the federal authorities who would tear down the entire structure of Samantha's elaborate scam. Every file I had recovered, every piece of digital evidence, was a testament to the fact that no matter how much someone tried to hide in the vastness of the online world, their secrets would eventually be unearthed. And as I powered down my computer, secure in the knowledge that the digital counteroffensive had laid bare the entirety of her betrayal, I felt the silent promise of justice whispering through the darkness. A promise that, come what may, the truth was now an unstoppable force that would redefine not only my future but the very fabric of the world in which deceit was given no quarter. Chapter 9. The tipping point. I awoke to a restless morning with a heavy heart and an unyielding resolve, knowing that the digital evidence I had painstakingly compiled was now beginning to trigger a cascade of consequences that would irrevocably alter the course of my life. As I sipped my morning coffee in the quiet solitude of my study, the headlines on my phone, sparse at first, then steadily growing in number and severity, served as a grim reminder that the intricate web of deceit spun by Samantha was now on the brink of unraveling completely. I sat back, reflecting on the countless hours I had spent meticulously gathering every detail of her financial transgressions. Every unauthorized withdrawal, every off-hours transaction, every suspicious log that linked her secret escapades to our drained savings. The evidence, once a series of isolated anomalies, had now coalesced into a damning narrative, one that painted a picture of deliberate betrayal and cold calculation. As I scrolled through the digital reports sent by my trusted financial analyst, a quiet confirmation that the patterns I had discovered were not coincidental but engineered. I felt the interactive prompts in my mind intensify, urging me to make a decisive move. The question was no longer whether I should confront her or let the evidence sit in silence. It was whether I should now push forward and let the federal authorities have full access to the complete dossier or maintain a sliver of control for my own strategic advantage in the courtroom. I knew that the tipping point was near. The whispers among our investors had already turned into murmurs of scandal, and the boardrooms that once echoed with confidence now buzzed with cautious inquiries about the integrity of our finances. I recalled the moment when my lawyer had confirmed that the evidence was irrefutable, a stark turning point when the case could no longer be dismissed as a personal dispute, but had grown into a full-blown investigation of corporate fraud. My heart pounded as I envisioned the next steps. A series of discreet meetings with federal agents, the release of carefully curated documents, and a public narrative that would eventually force Samantha to face the consequences of her deception. I could almost hear the interactive decision note in my mind. Press 1 to hand over the entire dossier immediately, or press 2 to hold back certain details for leverage. After long deliberation, I opted for full disclosure. I believed that the truth, once set in motion through the legal system, would shine too brightly to be ignored, and that any attempt to conceal part of the evidence would only serve to weaken my case. With steady hands, I arranged a meeting with a senior federal investigator specializing in financial crimes, and I spent an afternoon meticulously presenting every document, every digital file, and every record of suspicious transactions that I had gathered. The investigator, a man with a steely gaze and a measured tone, examined the evidence with the kind of clinical detachment that only years of exposure to fraud could engender. "This is substantial," he remarked, his voice echoing in the quiet conference room of a government building. "If we follow this trail, it could expose a network of financial manipulation that extends far beyond your personal grievances." I nodded, feeling both vindicated and anxious at the enormity of what was unfolding. In that moment, the interactive choice became clear. The tipping point was not just about seeking retribution for Samantha's betrayal. It was about dismantling an entire system of deceit that had stolen our future. As the federal investigation began to gather momentum, I found myself receiving discreet updates from my legal team and from the investigator's office. Every call, every email, served as a reminder that the walls of Samantha's carefully constructed empire were beginning to crumble. I watched with a mix of cold detachment and simmering satisfaction as the news began to spread among our financial circles. Whispers turned into serious inquiries, and soon major investors started to pull their support. The balance of power was shifting irrevocably. I felt that my plan had reached a critical juncture, one where the digital trail of lies I had unearthed was not only a record of personal betrayal but a blueprint for legal action that would ensure Samantha and all her accomplices faced the full force of justice. In the evenings, I sat in my study, the soft light of my desk lamp illuminating pages of meticulously organized data, and I reflected on the irony that the very tools Samantha had used to cover her tracks, encrypted emails, offshore transactions, and secret accounts, were now the instruments of her downfall. I had transformed her intricate web of deceit into a fortress of evidence, one that would soon be impenetrable by any attempt to rewrite the narrative. I began drafting a detailed memo for my legal team, outlining the timeline of every suspicious event and highlighting the digital signatures that would corroborate my findings. My mind buzzed with interactive possibilities. Every decision now was a deliberate move in a high-stakes game where the truth was my most valuable asset. The turning point was not merely a personal victory. It was a public reckoning that would shake the foundations of the financial world Samantha had once manipulated. As the federal probe deepened, I felt the quiet assurance that every shred of evidence was locking her in, leaving her with no escape from the inevitable fallout. The tension in my study gave way to a focused calm. The anger that had once threatened to overwhelm me was now tempered by a resolute determination to see justice served. I realized that the tipping point was not the moment of public exposure alone, but the cumulative effect of every detail that had been laid bare. The exact numbers, the precise dates, and the unassailable connections between each fraudulent transaction. With every final detail accounted for, I knew that Samantha's betrayal would be permanently etched in the annals of financial fraud, and that the case, once it went to court, would leave no room for denial or retraction. In that quiet, contemplative moment, as the soft hum of my computer blended with the distant sounds of the city, I resolved that the path ahead, though fraught with legal battles and public scrutiny, was the only way to reclaim my life and secure the future that had been stolen from me. The tipping point had arrived, and as I prepared to take the next step, I embraced the unyielding truth that in the face of betrayal, the relentless pursuit of justice is the only remedy, a remedy that, once set in motion, will reshape the narrative of a life once marred by deception.